Chapter 51. Next, the Alchemist Association. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 51. Next, the Alchemist Association Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Did you see the looks on their faces? As Chu Yunfan's family walked through their neighborhood, Yang Yayun asked as she beamed. She had never been so proud in her life. After they had eaten they fill and went home, she was still a little excited. Okay, we've been talking all night. Chu Wenqing could not help but remind her, but he was also happy. He was happier than anyone that Chu Yunfan was so successful. Today, his son had made him proud. But he was even happier that his son's future was not ruined because of his neglect. His son's performance was better than he had imagined. Mom, this is nothing. In the future, I'll be admitted to Federal University. When that time comes, I'll make them even more speechless. Chu Yunfan said with a smile. He pushed his sister's electric wheelchair forward. I believe that you'll definitely be admitted, big brother. Chu Qingxian said as she raised her small head. Chu Yunfan pat Chu Qingxian on the head. In his heart, he was thinking that he had just taken the first step. He still had to get admitted to Federal University, stand out, and cure his sister's illness. Ever since Lu Weiguo approached them at the dinner party tonight, his family's attitude toward him had obviously changed. He was someone that even the leader of his uncle had to curry favor with. And the man had treated him kindly. In addition, he had surprised everyone by getting into the focus class of the martial arts stream, which made him even more mysterious in the eyes of others. During the dinner party, whether it was his aunt or his uncle, they had all asked him without batting an eyelid what relationship he had with Lu Weiguo. Chu Wenshu was no fool and did not want to drag Lu Weiguo into this. He only vaguely said that he had met the man while working. He did not say anything else. In the eyes of others though, this had become a cover-up. From the looks of it, they could not just be acquaintances. On the other hand, the attitude of his grandfather and grandmother had improved toward Chu Yunfan's family, which made his parents much happier. He did not mind. He had long gotten used to being ignored, so he did not think too much about it. But his parents were obviously very happy. Soon, his family arrived home. After washing up, they returned to their respective rooms. Chu Yunfan turned on his computer and started surfing the internet. In modern society, the internet was roughly divided into two types. The first type was similar to the Common Era. However, it was no longer the same as before. Instead of being presented in the form of a web page, it was projected directly in front of one's face in the form of a 3D projection. Usually, when handling official business, watching videos, and communicating on the internet, they would use this type of mode. The second type was the virtual network. It allowed one to immerse oneself into the scene. In 2 days, there would be an examination for an alchemy trainee. It was unlike the previous examinations where the alchemy apprentices would take the examination on the virtual network. An alchemy trainee had to do the exam with real items. After all, although he was just an alchemy apprentice, he could be considered a real alchemist. In the memories of the alchemy emperor, during the ancient Zenith civilization, an alchemy trainee was considered to be officially independent. They were not like alchemy apprentices, who could only act as assistants to an official alchemist, assisting in picking herbs, doing odd jobs, adding fire to the furnace, and so on. However, one had to register for the examination in advance. On top of that, there was a registration fee of 10,000 yuan. Only then could the entire registration process be completed. He had been busy with the division examination previously and had not had the time to register. Now, he took advantage of the last bit of time to register. After registering, Chu Yunfan turned off his computer and began to meditate and rest. There were still 2 more days before the alchemy trainee test. Taking advantage of this time, he planned to go to the Alchemist Association to check out some information. Although he had the memories of the Alchemy Emperor in his head, he did not know much about the current development of alchemists. Especially during the alchemy trainee test, he had to confirm the formulas of the different recipes because he knew that the refining methods in his mind might not be on the same standards that had been set by the Alchemist Association. Even during the ancient Zenith civilization, there were many different kinds of refining methods and many different medicines. If just one of the medicinal ingredients was changed, the medicinal efficacy of the end product and the refining process might be very different. In modern society, body refining pills alone had many different refining methods. But in the end, the body refining pills that were popular in this day and age had become the standard refining model. There was no other reason than because the body refining pills refined with this kind of formula had the highest value-for-money ratio. This also met the requirements of the modern cultivation era's industrialized way of refining pills. Of course, some rich people could also hire specialized alchemists to refine some body refining pills that were expensive but had better medicinal effects. For example, the improved body refining pill that Chu Yunfan had taken before had been this kind of pill. He had the memories of the alchemy emperor. As long as he knew the correct formula that the Alchemist Association had prescribed, it would not be difficult for him to memorize it. All the pill refining processes and techniques were the accumulation of basic skills. And for Chu Yunfan, who had been infused with the memories of the alchemy emperor and integrated these basic skills into his bone marrow, it was not difficult at all. Apart from that, he also wanted to understand the current level of development of alchemy. Some of the information could be found on the internet, and some could only be found in the Alchemist Association's library. Therefore, he had to make a trip to the Alchemist Association. Early the next morning, Chu Yunfan bade farewell to his family and headed to the Alchemist Association in the city center. Just like the last time he came to the Alchemist Association, there were no changes at all. The place was bustling with traffic and filled with a sea of people. Even though it was early in the morning, there were already a lot of people at the association. Some were here to concoct pills, some were here to employ others, and some were here to purchase pills. At the same time, this was a very lively market related to pills. The Alchemist Association's library was not open to the public. At the very least, one had to be an alchemy apprentice to be able to enter the library. Even so, there was a fee, 100 yuan an hour. Fortunately, to the current Chu Yunfan, this fee was nothing. In modern society, cultivation, land, politics, and wealth were needed everywhere. Although it was now a technological era, the library was still built in the antique style. The rows and rows of books were made of special paper and would not rot for hundreds, or even thousands of years. To be able to build such a large library in the center of Calm Ocean City, where every inch of land was expensive, showed how rich the Alchemist Association was. Chu Yunfan entered the library and began to search for the information he was looking for. Chapter 52. What right do you have to say that there's a mistake in this book? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 52. What right do you have to say that there's a mistake in this book? Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The first thing Chu Yunfan checked was the information regarding the pill formulas that would be used during the alchemy trainee examination. There were quite a lot of books regarding this topic. 100 days before the apprentice alchemist examination, how to sign up for the alchemy trainee examination, my opinion on the alchemy trainee examination, etc. There were many reference materials. After flipping through a few books, Chu Yunfan already knew the scope of the pill assessment and the standard pill formulas for the examination. These were not secrets. The standard pill formulas, apart from some of the higher-ranked ones, were basically open to the public. In the current society, the Federation government always promoted industrialized pill refinement methods. Although pill refinement currently could not be compared to the production of industrial products, after many years of standardized promotion, the efficiency and quantity of pill refinement now were much higher than it was 100 years ago. Only this way could it support the great age of cultivation. What was truly top secret were some of the more special pill formulas and the rarer pill formulas. These pill formulas were basically either in the hands of alchemy masters or in the hands of the Federation government and various large corporations. After looking through these pill formulas, Chu Yunfan began to look through some other information on pill refinement. This was a library that belonged to the public. Other than some relatively basic information, there was not much regarding pill refinement that was too profound. Most of it was theoretical. The so-called theoretical information was the kind of information that seemed to be complicated, but in fact, it did contain anything crucial. However, what Chu Yunfan needed to look through now was this theoretical information. Through this theoretical information, he could roughly determine what level of alchemy had been reached. Chu Yunfan looked through the books one by one. Fortunately, these were relatively basic materials or information that were biased toward some theories. There was no need to charge additional fees. If it were practical materials, he would have been charged based on the original materials. Collection of the alchemy system of the ancient Zenith civilization, discovery on the attributes of the swimming dragon herb, introduction to alchemy, etc. Chu Yunfan started reading one book after another. His reading speed was very fast, reading almost 10 lines in just one glance. It was not only because he had inherited the memories of the alchemy emperor, but also because he was very familiar with the information regarding alchemy. It was also because his brain had been developed. He could understand everything with just a single glance. At this moment, his brain was like a supercomputer, able to process all kinds of information in an instant. This was what some called talent. In reality, difficult problems in cultivation always had easy solutions. By drawing inferences from one example, one would never forget it. Talent was the sum of these abilities. At this moment, he had already entered a state of undivided attention. He needed to understand the modern alchemy system. The more he understood, the more he discovered that the modern alchemy system was indeed extraordinary. In the ancient Zenith civilization, the alchemy system needed 10,000 years to make progress. A huge change in a short period of time back then could only be possible through the appearance of a great alchemy master. However, although the modern alchemy system was not as prosperous as the ancient Zenith civilization, it could gather the power of the entire human race to conduct research and analysis. This speed was not something that the ancient Zenith civilization could compare to. The alchemy emperor in his memories was a gifted genius who was unparalleled in alchemy, and his strength alone could surpass the strength of hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of others. However, he could not surpass the strength of the entire human race. Right now, the Federation government did not mention the number of alchemists who were directly involved in alchemy research, but it was safe to say that there were at least 1 million people involved. If the scope was widened a little, it would not be an exaggeration to say that there were several million people. Moreover, the results of the research would often spread very quickly. There were many people who had been involved in alchemy during the ancient Zenith civilization. However, whenever they came up with something, it would often be treated as a secret that could not be passed on to anyone. This had caused the progress of alchemy during the ancient Zenith civilization to be slow. It was far from being as fast and as violent as in modern society. However, as he read, he could also find many errors in it. Relatively speaking, the current research on alchemy in human society was just at the beginning stages. There were many things, but they were all just theoretical research or even theoretical conjectures. The direction of these conjectures was a path that Chu Yunfan had walked before. Naturally, he could easily spot the errors. Another mistake. A so-called book actually has no less than 10 mistakes. Fortunately, the author had some self-awareness. He claimed that many things are based on his own assumptions, so he can't be blamed for any misunderstandings. Chu Yunfan muttered to himself. As he read, he picked out the mistakes. Suddenly, he felt a heavy breath on his neck. He looked up and saw a young girl glaring at him. It was a young girl who looked about 13 or 14 years old, just exiting the category of Lolita. Her face was exquisite, and her long hair fell over the shoulders of her T-dot shirt. From the ends of her hot pants were two long, straight legs. This made her appear much taller than her peers. The young girl stared at Chu Yun-fan with her big, glistening eyes. The bangs on her forehead looked quite cute and she was breathing quite heavily. "Who are you?" the shocked Chu Yun-fan asked. Although this girl was very cute, he felt uncomfortable being stared at like this. "You said that this book has errors. There are no less than 10 errors." The girl pointed at Chu Yun-fan and said angrily. "Is there anything strange about this book having errors?" Chu Yun-fan could not help but feel a little strange. "Impossible, what right do you have to say that this book has errors?" the girl squealed. It was as if she would teach him a lesson if he did not explain himself. Chu Yun-fan flipped through the pages of the book. The book was Miscellaneous Topics in the Alchemy, written by Bai Hong. He did not have any impression of this person. Actually, other than the alchemy emperor Du Qingtao, Chu Yun-fan only knew of a few people in the alchemy world. His understanding of the others was limited as well. However, he was not a fool. He immediately pointed at Bai Hong's name and said, "I'm sorry. Could it be that this Bai Hong has something to do with you? Can't I just be his admirer? Didn't you say claim to be very smart just a moment ago? Why are you at a loss for words now? Did you not say that there are more than 10 mistakes in this book? All right, tell me then." Chapter 53. Alchemic Reaction Formula. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 53. Alchemic Reaction Formula. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The young girl pointed at Chu Yun-fan with one pale finger and said aggressively. "Why are you so agitated? Humans aren't gods, so it's impossible for them to be omniscient and omnipotent. What's so strange about having errors? Chu Yun-fan said indifferently. The young girl glanced at the name tag that Chu Yun-fan had hung when he entered and said with a disdainful expression, "You're just a high-level apprentice alchemist. Do you have the right to say that the author of this book wrote anything wrong?" This name tag was given by Chu Yun-fan when he entered. It indicated his rank and also proved his identity. After all, this library was only open to alchemists. Chu Yun-fan originally did not want to pay any more attention to this young girl, but when he heard her say this, he opened his mouth and said, "In this world, right is right, and wrong is wrong. Whether or not this book is written wrongly has nothing to do with his rank, right? That's good. Since you said he wrote it wrong, then show me." The young girl said. "Many of these mistakes are very obvious. For example, there are at least 3 mistakes in the deduction of the reaction formula when refining pills. I don't know which ancient book he got the reaction formula from. Some of the others are correct, but a few of the core reaction chains are clearly wrong. He should have deduced it by comparing the reactions of certain kinds of pills. However, if it was placed on other pills, this deduction would be completely untenable. However, for him to be able to think of this step, it can be considered amazing." Chu Yun-fan directly pointed at the reaction formula of refining pills recorded in the book and said. In fact, there were certain rules for what herbs and what kind of effects could be produced in alchemy. In the early stages of alchemy, it was basically a matter of luck. Even during the ancient Zenith civilization, which was a prosperous time for alchemic research, this had been the same. It was basically a matter of luck. It was only in the later stages of alchemy that people with extremely profound cultivation began to explore these rules. This was the so-called reaction formula. This was also what Chu Yun-fan was amazed about. The ancient Zenith civilization had developed for many tens of thousands of years before they realized the matter of the reaction formula for alchemy. However, modern humans had only been developing alchemy for a little over 200 years before they were already aware of the reaction formula for alchemy. Of course, they could not rule out the possibility that they had just discovered some information from the alchemy of the ancient Zenith civilization. However, the speed of this evolution was enough to make people gasp in admiration. The girl suddenly hesitated. Chu Yunfan had made a solemn statement, and it did not seem like he was making things up. Even she had only just heard about the reaction formula. As for the reaction formula, even she, who was a well-known alchemy master amongst humans, had only just learned about it. She had only heard a little about it from her elder. When she had asked her elder back then, her elder had only smiled and said that these things were still too far out of her reach. Even for a talented young girl like her who had displayed astonishing talent in alchemy since she was young, she was still too far away. This young girl's name was Bai Linger, and the Bai Hong who had been ignored by Chu Yunfan was her ELD. If she knew what Chu Yunfan was thinking, she would definitely be hopping mad. Her elder was not just some nobody. He was one of the greatest alchemists below the Alchemy King. Within the Federation, even the Federation president would treat him with respect. In the circle of alchemists, one would hear the name of her elder from the moment they entered the sect. It would definitely be like thunder ringing in their ears. Who would not admire him? However, this fellow in front of her actually did not seem to care at all. He even said that there were errors in her elder's book. Moreover, there were no less than 10 of them. This was simply intolerable. From the very beginning, Bai Linger felt that Chu Yunfan did not seem to be studying at all. His reading speed was too fast. From afar, it looked like he was casually flipping through the books. The most hateful thing was that after this guy casually flipped through the books, he actually dared to slander her elder. That was why she could not help but go forward to reason with him. However, Chu Yunfan's words had already exceeded the scope of her knowledge. Even though she was known as the most talented genius girl in the clan, she was only 14 years old and had already obtained the Advanced Alchemist Apprentice license. However, it was clear that the topic of the reaction formula had completely exceeded her ability to understand. If it was not for the fact that she had been by the side of her elder and listened to some of his teachings, she probably would not even know these basic things. This time, she returned to Calm Ocean City to take the alchemy trainee test. Once she could pass the test, she would create a new record. Today, she was here to look up some information. She had not expected to meet such a freak. These things are not difficult to verify, but in general, it's okay. The person who wrote this book has some skill, but some of the theories are clearly beyond his current scope. Chu Yunfan said. After saying that, Chu Yunfan stood up and left. The information he had gotten today was almost enough. Enough for him to have a clearer understanding of the current level of alchemy. Nowadays, the level of alchemy in human society had a lot to do with the level of martial arts development. The level of alchemy was dependent on the development of martial arts, and the need for the development of martial arts directly stimulated the advancement of alchemy. Bai Linger could only watch as Chu Yunfan left, but she could not stop him because she could not judge whether what Chu Yunfan had said was right or not. After Chu Yunfan left, Bai Linger hurriedly contacted her elder. From the laptop on her computer, a human figure was projected. This person looked tall and straight, with a head full of white hair, but he did not look old. Instead, he had a somewhat resolute appearance. This man was none other than Bai Linger's elder. He was also one of the few great alchemists in humanity, Bai Hong. Little girl, why are you contacting me? Did you encounter something you don't understand? Bai Hong said with a smile. Bai Linger paused for a moment before saying, Sir, I met a person today. Bai Linger told Bai Hong exactly what had happened. At first, Bai Hong's expression was quite relaxed and he did not take what Bai Linger said to heart. However, as time passed and Bai Linger mentioned the reaction formula, especially the part that Chu Yunfan had pointed out a few mistakes in the reaction formula that he had written, his expression suddenly became solemn. Because only he himself knew that there might be a problem with the reaction formula that he had written. He had also learned about this reaction formula from an ancient book that he had obtained previously. But that ancient book was incomplete and he had only obtained an incomplete formula. And there was indeed a portion that he had filled in according to his own research. Chu Yunfan was not making things up. Chapter 54. There were creatures called geniuses. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 54. There were creatures called geniuses. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation by Hong fell into deep thought. In fact, there were very few people in human society who had begun studying reaction formulas. This was only possible after one had a considerable understanding of alchemy. In reality, other than the alchemy king who was high and mighty, there were only a few great alchemists within human society. More or less, they had also begun to study reaction formulas. Therefore, in his opinion, Chu Yunfan should be the disciple of one of those people. Only then could he possibly know about reaction formulas. As for Chu Yunfan's own research, Bai Hong did not believe it at all. His age was obvious. Someone like his granddaughter, Bai Linger, was already a genius. However, she had only just become an advanced alchemy apprentice. However, he heard from his granddaughter that the other party was only around 10 years old, yet he was already an advanced alchemy apprentice. A youth of his age would at most be a low-level alchemy apprentice. This made him even more certain of his initial judgment. This youth was definitely the disciple of some great alchemist. He knew all those great alchemists, but when it came to their disciples, there were so many that he naturally did not know all of them. But to be able to point out the mistakes in my book, this is not something an ordinary person can do. Bai Hong thought to himself. However, the dozen or so mistakes that Chu Yunfan mentioned immediately made him pay attention. He was the person who wrote this book, so he was very clear about its contents. When he was writing it, there had indeed been more than a dozen ambiguous spots. Including the conjecture of the reaction formulas, not everything was completely confirmed. It was naturally impossible to write an ordinary book that was ambiguous. It was very easy to be picked out and have it slapped in his face. However, this kind of purely speculative theoretical work did not have so many requirements. Many of them were conjectures about some areas that had not yet been touched upon. Even if it was wrong, it was just a guess. However, even an ordinary alchemy expert would not be so simple as to criticize his proposal to the point of saying that it was worthless. That kind of claim was not a guess. Instead, he must have been clear on the answer before he would say it with such certainty. Girl, if you meet him again next time, ask him to tell you what exactly are the mistakes in the book that I wrote. Bai Hong said. Since he also felt that there might be mistakes. He could not let it go so easily. He could take it back before the circulation was too big. Otherwise, it would not look good if he was criticized by others in the future. Of course, he did not think that this was Chu Yunfan's knowledge. It must be the knowledge of the alchemy expert behind him. Okay. Bai Linger nodded. She had not expected her elder to say this. In this way, what that guy said was actually true. How is this possible, she thought. That fellow looked only a few years older than her. He was also an advanced alchemy apprentice like her, but how could he know some knowledge that even she did not know? One had to know that although she was only an advanced alchemy apprentice, because she often followed her elder and had received her elder's guidance, even ordinary alchemy experts might not be as knowledgeable as her. Even though she was upset, she could not help but feel a little curious. Chu Yunfan, who had left the library, did not know that he had aroused Bai Linger's curiosity. To him, this was just an episode of him coming to the library. After returning home, Chu Yunfan continued to cultivate and consolidate his cultivation. The night passed without any incident. Early the next morning, Chu Yunfan rushed to the Alchemist Association in Calm Ocean City. On this day, the Alchemist Association was obviously much livelier than usual. There were many alchemy apprentices who rushed from all over the city. All of them had to take the examination here. For today's examination, the Alchemist Association had set up a building specifically for the examination. Chu Yunfan went to the registration area and signed in. After receiving his name tag and the examination notice, he entered the examination building and waited. The examination would start at 10 and would last until noon. At this moment, the entire hall was filled with people. They were all alchemists who had come to take the examination. Chu Yunfan had just walked in when he immediately attracted the attention of many people. Because his face was so tender. The alchemists who came to take the examination were generally in their 20s. Even those who looked to be in their 30s were common. In modern society, the lifespan of humans had been extended. In the Common Era, according to the number of times that human cells are divided, the perfect lifespan of a human should be around 120 years old. However, in that era, only very few individuals had the chance to live past 120 years old. However, in the Kunlun era, 120 years old was only the average life expectancy. Many powerhouses lived past 100 years old. It was not uncommon for them to live past 200 years old. These people, who looked like they were in their 20s, might already be in their 30s. Just like Chu Wencheng and Yang Yayun, they looked like they were in their early 30s, but in fact, they were already in their 50s. In modern society, most people in their 40s and 50s were considered young. When they were in their 70s and 80s, they could only be considered middle-aged. Only when they were in their 90s did they step into old age. If an alchemist wanted to become a master, they would have to go through a long period of repeated practice. It was also because of this that in this examination hall where most people in their 20s and 30s were here to take the alchemy trainee examination for an examinee with a tender face such as Chu Yunfan to suddenly appear, it was inevitable that he would be extremely eye-catching. Who is this person? Why haven't I seen him before? I don't know. His face looks very tender. Could he really be a high school student? That's not possible, right? We have graduated from university for so many years before we can even become alchemy trainees. Chu Yunfan's surroundings were filled with discussions. Compared to Chu Yunfan's completely unfamiliar face, they were clearly much more familiar with each other. However, Chu Yunfan was clearly not the most eye-catching. After Chu Yunfan entered, as he stood in a corner of the examination waiting hall, a young girl around the age of 13 or 14 stood proudly among all the alchemy apprentices waiting for the examination. If Chu Yunfan was eye-catching, then the existence of this young girl was dazzling. She was only 13 or 14 years old, yet she was already an advanced alchemy apprentice. Moreover, she was here to participate in the exam. Once she passed the exam, she would become an alchemy trainee. Although there was still trainee in the title, at the very least, she would upgrade from the title of alchemy apprentice. What were they doing when they were 13 or 14 years old? It looked like they could not even be considered apprentices. At that time, they had just come into contact with alchemy, and many of them had just learned some related theories in school. Then, they had experienced at least 10 years of apprenticeship. They had studied with official alchemists for so long before they could finally finish their apprenticeship. Although they had long known that there were creatures called geniuses that could not be compared with ordinary people, it still made them infuriated. Chapter 55. Precious Reaction Formula. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 55. Precious Reaction Formula Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. But who else could that girl be other than Bai Linger? If they could barely accept Chu Yunfan in their hearts, then Bai Linger was a completely different kind of creature. There was a kind of creature called a genius. And this kind of creature obviously could not be calculated with common sense. When Chu Yunfan saw Bai Linger, he was also slightly surprised. The more he understood alchemy, the more he understood how much time he needed to practice before he could master it. At such a young age, Bai Linger was already an alchemy apprentice. At this stage, she was not only an assistant to an official alchemist, she had even achieved a mastery of her own. It could even be said that the more profound her alchemy knowledge, the further she would go in the future. Of course, Bai Ling could not be compared to the alchemy emperor in his memories. She was truly a rare genius that only appeared once in 10,000 years. However, with her age, it was still very shocking. His ears were filled with discussions about Bai Ling. This is too exaggerated. At most, she's just a junior high school student. I think I saw a senior high school student just now, and that's already very exaggerated. This junior high school student is nothing. This comparison is really infuriating. If it wasn't for the certification of an advanced alchemy apprentice that's impossible to fake, I would have thought that she had cheated to get it. But there are more and more powerful people now. A previous study said that modern people have improved a lot compared to the previous common era. It's not just their physical fitness. In the past, it was said that a place that produced talents would be beautiful and full of spiritual energy. Now, the entire earth is filled with spiritual energy. Living in such an environment day and night, the birth rate of geniuses far exceeds that of the previous common era. However, in the midst of the crowd, Bai Ling maintained an indifferent expression in the face of everyone's discussion. However, when she spotted Chu Yunfan within the crowd, her eyes immediately lit up. She hurriedly walked toward Chu Yunfan. "You again?" Chu Yunfan said with a frown. Bai Ling's expression instantly stiffened. She was not that disgusting, was she? She wanted to turn around and leave, but when she thought of the instructions of her elder, she could only forcefully suppress her unhappiness and speak. "I have something to ask you. Yesterday, you said that there were at least 10 mistakes in the book. Which 10 were they?" Chu Yunfan's brows furrowed even more tightly. So it was because of this matter. He was not stupid. He was even more certain that this Bai Ling must have some sort of relationship with that Bai Hong. Otherwise, she would not be so agitated. However, since she had specially come today to ask, it was clear that yesterday, she had also asked her elder about the reaction formula he had mentioned. She had even asked the author of this book. This Bai Ling had already reached the level of an advanced alchemy apprentice at such a young age. It was not something that could be achieved just by having outstanding talent. She had to rely on a huge entity behind her to be able to provide all sorts of alchemic recipes and materials that would allow her to reach the level of an alchemy apprentice at such a young age. An alchemist was a profession that only had a small return on investment in the early stages. Do not look at how the later stages of the profession were filled with wealth that could rival a country. However, it was very normal for the early stages of the profession to be miserable. Modern society was still fine. The federal government had a certain amount of subsidies for official alchemists. In the ancient Zenith civilization, if there were no families or sects behind them, these alchemists would be miserable. "Is this how you beg people?" Chu Yunfan said coldly. "All right, I was wrong. Can you tell me what exactly was wrong?" Bai Ling could only clench her teeth and say with a docile expression. At this moment, Bai Ling's submissive look immediately caused the group of alchemists and apprentices to glare angrily at Chu Yunfan. After all, other than the fact that Bai Ling was a genius that made them feel out of place, there was also the fact that she was a beauty that attracted the attention of many. Although she was still young, her figure and appearance were already quite outstanding. At this moment, no matter how they looked at Chu Yunfan, he was extremely annoying. Everyone glared at him, but Chu Yunfan did not feel anything. He merely glanced at Bai Ling and said, "Find a piece of paper and a pen and I'll write it down for you. Originally, I was too lazy to talk to you, but I'm afraid that this book would mislead others. Since it's written wrongly, change it." When Bai Ling heard Chu Yunfan speak so bluntly about her elder, she immediately gnashed her teeth in hatred. However, she did not dare stop him. On the contrary, she hurriedly ran out and soon brought the paper and pen over. Chu Yunfan wrote down the mistakes that he saw. Everything was vivid in his mind as if he was reading and writing at the same time. It was still fresh in his memory. Other than pointing out the problems, Chu Yunfan also wrote down the correct parts. They were all theories, especially since many of them were conjectures. It was not difficult to write down the correct parts. However, on the issue of the final reaction formula, he hesitated for a moment. The reaction formula was the guiding general outline of the entire path of alchemy. As long as one mastered the reaction formula, even if there were many medicinal pills that had yet to be practiced, one would already be able to tell whether there was a possibility of success just by looking at whether or not the reaction formula met the requirements. Each reaction formula had been fumbled through countless times of alchemy. Its value was indeed a no-brainer. Chu Yunfan paused for a moment and then filled in a few of the incomplete parts of Bai Hong's reaction formula. Only the last two, the most crucial two, he left out. Bai Linger could not understand it, but Bai Hong should be able to understand it. He should know the importance of this reaction formula. In the ancient Zenith civilization, any alchemy master who had developed any reaction formula was almost a king, and his name would go down in history. In modern society, it was probably no different. Chu Yunfan naturally had other plans. After he finished writing, he handed the pen and paper back to Bai Linger and said, "Hand this over. I think the person supporting you should understand." After Bai Linger glanced at Chu Yunfan, she walked out of the door. It was obvious that she was going to pass this thing to her elder. Chu Yunfan and Bai Linger's actions immediately left many alchemy apprentices confused. They did not know what the two of them were up to. Chu Yunfan had no intention of explaining. He just quietly waited in the hall. Not long after, the alchemy trainee exam began. The sound of a broadcast rang in their ears. The alchemy trainee exam is about to begin. Alchemy trainees, please proceed to your examination hall according to the number plates you have received and prepare for the examination. Chu Yunfan stood up and followed the instructions to the examination hall according to his number plate. With this step, the situation would be completely different. The difference between alchemy apprentices and alchemy trainees was not just about the number plates. Their statuses were practically worlds apart. Chapter 56. The amazement of the apprentices. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 56. The amazement of the apprentices. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The examination hall for the alchemy trainee exam was set up in this building. Each examination hall was equipped with 20 alchemical furnaces. Each furnace took up quite a bit of space, and the space around each of them was separated by a yellow line. Each examinee was free to move within their own spaces. On the other side of the hall was a huge pile of various medicinal herbs. Each variety of medicinal herb had been prepared in large quantities. It was clear that the examinees were to retrieve their own ingredients to concoct their pills. The process of retrieving medicinal herbs was also a test of an alchemist's basic skills. Each of the examinees followed their respective numbers and came to their respective positions. From the tablet at the side, they received instructions on what pill they were to concoct. Because everything was random, N01 knew what medicinal pills they would encounter during the exam. Basically, they had to leam every type of medicinal pill, and the ones they would be tested on were the most basic of medicinal pills. When it was his turn to receive his instructions, Chu Yunfan looked down to see what he had been given. It was a beginner-level Q replenishing pill. This pill's main function was to replenish true energy. Modern theories believed that true energy was a kind of bioenergy. This kind of bioenergy could not be recovered quickly. The stronger the martial artist, the faster the recovery speed. Normally, it would be a small matter. But in an emergency, in order to recover true energy quickly, one could use Qi replenishing pill. These pills were divided into beginner, intermediate, and advanced-leveled ones. The effects of each level were very different, and so was the price. However, no matter which level of QI replenishing pill it was a very popular commodity, especially for exploration teams. These exploration teams had to dive into all kinds of places all year round and often encountered some extremely dangerous situations. The chi replenishing pill was a necessary pill or them. This was where the practical portion of the test began. After that, they would have to answer a theory paper. If an examinee passed both tests, they would naturally be admitted as alchemy trainees. Chu Yunfan did not immediately move to get the ingredients medicine. Instead, he paused for a moment. At this moment, the other examinees had already walked to the mountain of medicinal herbs to choose the ingredients that they wanted to use. All of them were using all kinds of tools to ensure that the quantity and size of the ingredients they retrieved would not cause any problems. However, Chu Yunfan had no use for such contraptions for pill concocting. Instead, he grabbed the medicinal ingredients tightly and shoved them into his medicine basket in a very crude manner. He only picked from each medicinal ingredient available once and there was never a second time. In the beginning, no one noticed this. But very soon, the nearby examinees all noticed Chu Yunfan's crude movements. Many people thought that Chu Yunfan had gone mad. This was just foolishness. All medicinal pills had an exacting amount of each ingredient. If it was even a little off, the end result would be far from the desired one. This was simply foolishness. However, very quickly, some of the observant examinees discovered that every time Chu Yunfan grabbed an ingredient, he was grabbing a very accurate amount. Although these examinees were unlike Chu Yunfan, who could determine the exact quantity with just a single glance and a single grab. They had been alchemy apprentices for more than 10 years, so they had a rough idea of the quantity. Their hearts were instantly filled with shock. If it was just 1 or 2 times that the quantity was accurate, then forget it. But every time, the quantity was pretty accurate. This was not something that could be explained away by good luck. Only now did they understand that this extremely tender-looking high school student alchemy apprentice was definitely not here to make up the numbers. He was indeed skilled. Many people could not help but feel shocked. To be able to hone his skill to such accuracy, how many times must Chu Yunfan have practiced grabbing 8 medicine to achieve this? It was simply unbelievable. Some even speculated that for him to be able to become an advanced alchemy apprentice at such a young age, he was most likely not self-taught and must have had a sect behind him. This kind of ancient method had not disappeared in this Kunlun era. On the contrary, it was able to flourish. Many sects had their own unique methods, and many of them had made appearances within the field of alchemy. It was just that they did not know which alchemy sect he was a disciple of. Many people were extremely shocked. However, someone retorted, "That's not right. I have seen many disciples of alchemy sections. Even if they have secret techniques, they would not be able to master them to such an extent at such a young age. If they have secret techniques, they should only increase their speed. It should not be possible for them to master these techniques." Even the many disciples of alchemy sects who have become official alchemists still need to use tools. This made Chu Yuntan seem even more mysterious in their eyes. As they were exclaiming in admiration, Chu Yunfan had already grabbed all the medicinal herbs he needed and returned to his position. He lit a fire, put on a pot of water, and threw in the medicinal herbs in order. Everything was as smooth as flowing water. It was as if he did not even need to think. Everything was as if he had rehearsed it countless times. This caused many people to sigh in amazement. After a long while, they finally remembered that they were also in the midst of their own exam. A lot of time had passed and the time they had left was not too generous. Very quickly, everyone finished gathering their ingredients, returned to their seats, and began concocting their respective medicinal pills. At this moment, they did not dare be distracted by Chu Yunfan. If they were to get distracted during the concoction process, the entire process might fail. Then, they would have to prepare all over again for a very long time before they could resit the exam. Chu Yunfan would occasionally pay some attention to the process in front of him. However, along with the memories of the alchemy emperor, these things had long been fused into his bone marrow. The entire pill concoction process was practically second nature to him. Therefore, he was not like other examinees who were pinching their ears and scratching their cheeks nervously or constantly looking at the time, trying to grasp every second that passed. The experience that Chu Yunfan had obtained from the Alchemy Emperor's memories was much more accurate than any alarm clock. However, his thoughts drifted away. To him, he only needed to pass this exam so that he would have proof that he was an alchemy trainee. After that, he would be able to sell the pills he made openly. Previously, if the transaction between him and Lu Qingxian were really to be investigated, it would be considered an illegal transaction because he did not have an alchemy trainee's license. This was also a measure taken by the federal government to limit the flow of quality pills going into the pill market. Now that this shackle was about to be removed, it would be much easier for him to earn money. By then, curing his sister would not be a big problem. Actually, in the Alchemy Emperor's memories, there were medicinal pills that could treat this kind of illness. However, the medicinal ingredients required were sky-high in price. It was simply not something that the current Chu Yunfan could afford. He might as well use modern gene therapy techniques as they were more convenient and simple. After all roads lead to the same destination. In the end, as long as he could cure his sister's illness, he did not mind using any method. As he daydreamed, 2 hours passed in the blink of an eye. The alchemical furnace in front of him automatically opened up. A white mist poured out, and a medicinal fragrance assailed his nostrils. Qi Nourishment Pill. Success. Chapter 57. How could there be such a monster? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 57. How could there be such a monster? Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Chu Yunfan was the first to succeed. Almost everyone turned to look at Chu Yunfan as if wanting to see if he had succeeded. And it looked like he had. It was just that they did not know how many points he had gotten. However, Chu Yunfan's face was expressionless. No one could tell the quality of his work. Only Chu Yunfan could see the score on the tablet in front of him. Full marks. The pills concocted during the alchemy trainee exam were graded by the computer. If 70% was the benchmark for passing the exam, 100% would naturally gain full marks. While the others were still concocting their pills, Chu Yunfan had already answered the questions of the written test. Although these were all theoretical questions, to Chu Yunfan, they were not a problem at all. Many alchemy apprentices had memorized these theories. Many of them were just theoretical. However, to Chu Yunfan, these so-called theories were all problems that he had encountered before, so none of them was too difficult. His fingers flew back and forth and he had swiftly finished answering all the questions. The score came soon enough. And there were two big words again: full marks. Chu Yunfan had got full marks on both his practical and theory assessments. Chu Yunfan naturally passed the alchemy trainee exam. Of course, Chu Yunfan did not linger. He still had to hurry home and cultivate. In any case, as long as he passed the examination, it did not matter whether he got his license or not. This was because the information would be entered into his identity card. As long as one used a card reader to read it, they would be able to find out that he was already an alchemy trainee. Moreover, when the time came, the Alchemist Association would send his license and some official alchemist notes to his home. 2 hours after Chu Yunfan had, the results of the test were finally released. In front of the electronic notice board, the petite Bai Linger stood in front of the list with an incredulous expression on her face. Her name, Bai Linger, was at the top of the list. She had gotten a perfect score in the theoretical exam and her practical score was 98 points. Such a result was already considered outstanding, and this was not just within the alchemy trainee exam in Calm Ocean City. This result was outstanding throughout all of Donghua City. She was definitely outstanding. In fact, it was not wrong to say that aside from her, there should not be even a single person who could get a perfect score in theory, let alone surpass her practical score. Most of them had only scored 70 to 80 points. No one else had been able to get a score of 90 points. Just like what everyone had guessed before the assessment, she had indeed far surpassed the strength of ordinary alchemy apprentices. It was enough for her to lock in the first place. She was someone who could be considered to have performed beyond her standard. She should have been able to win first place in Donghua City's alchemy trainee exam. However, in reality, she was only in second place. The words, Chu Yun Fan, which were in the first place were extremely eye-catching. Especially the 2 full marks, which made her feel even more incredulous in her heart. Forget about getting full marks in the theoretical portion, as there were indeed some people who were quite talented in memorization, such as herself. Of course, everything was just based on memory, so it was understandable. However, it was simply impossible for her to get full marks in the practical portion. Even for a person like her who was called a genius, she usually only got around 90 points in the mock exam, an average of 95 points. Reaching 98 points in the exam was indeed beyond her standard. Therefore, she understood even more clearly that it was almost impossible to get a perfect score. How could anyone get a perfect score? Even if my elder were to take the exam, I'm afraid even he would not get a perfect score every time. Is it possible that this examinee didn't make any mistakes in the whole process? Bai Linger simply could not believe it. Even a genius like her would only be able to guarantee a 90% quality on this level of medicinal pills every single time. However, a 100% quality medicinal pill was not something that could be explained by luck. I want to see just who you are. Bai Linger immediately squeezed out of the crowd and headed toward the depths of the Alchemist Association. At this moment, all the examinees were immersed in astonishment. There was no doubt that all these examinees here could only be considered mediocre. During the assessment, they could only score 70.80 points. In other words, the quality of the medicinal pills they concocted was only 70.8%. They were not considered very powerful. But now, 2 strong people had suddenly appeared on the ranking list. The second ranked Bai Linger had scored 98 points. She was simply a monster. Even when concocting such a low-grade medicinal pill, it was very difficult for advanced alchemy apprentices to score more than 90 points every time. As for 98 points, the grade was probably only possible for an official alchemist. As for Chu Yun Fan, who was in the first place and had concocted a pill that scored 100%, no one had any energy to ridicule him anymore. They had been in contact with alchemy for at least a few years. Naturally, they all understood that 98 points might be due to luck, but 100 was definitely not luck anymore. That was why they felt that they had no strength to complain. If not for the fact that they all knew that it was impossible to cheat in this kind of exam, they would have suspected that an official alchemist had secretly taken the exam on his behalf. Although most people took the score as a reflection of a person's strength, they did not know that some people only got 100 points because the full score was only 100 points. At this time, Bai Linger had already found out about Chu Yun Fan through the Alchemist Association's internal information. Although she was only an alchemy apprentice, she had a strong entity behind her, one of the few alchemy masters, Bai Hong. Using her connections, she managed to find Chu Yun Fan's information. Although it was only some superficial information, it was enough for her. However, when she saw the information, she was upset. This Chu Yun Fan was actually that arrogant fellow from before. Looking at his record of advancement, it turned out that he had completed just about half a month ago. He did not have any records before that. It was as if he had suddenly appeared. About half a month ago, he had consecutively passed the beginner, intermediate, and advanced alchemy apprentice exams. Now, he has gotten first place in the alchemy trainee examination in the entirety of Calm Ocean City. Such a speed was no joke. At this moment, she trusted her elder's judgment even more. He was probably a disciple of some alchemy sect or a personal disciple of a great alchemist. Previously, he must have always stayed by his master's side and his master must have taught him personally. Now that he was almost done learning, his master must have released him to participate in the alchemy trainee exam. The truth was, she was the same as well. Ever since she was young, she had always been by her elder's side. She cultivated with the old ancestor while coming into contact with alchemy. Now that her elder saw that her standards were sufficient enough for her to leave his academy, he decided to let her take the exam. The most infuriating thing was that this fellow had even left early. It was as though he had already decided that he would definitely be able to pass the examination and that he would definitely be the first. Just you wait, Chu Yunfan. We'll meet again. Next time, I'll definitely beat you. Bai Ling'er looked at Chu Yunfan's name and said this with a serious expression. This was the first time she had a strong desire to win. There was no one in her age group who could stir up her competitive soul in alchemy. Chapter 58. 5 days. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 58. 5 days. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. At this moment, Bai Hong, Bai Ling'er's elder and one of the great alchemists of human society, was looking at the answers Chu Yunfan had given him. Originally, he did not have much hope that Chu Yunfan would be able to solve the problem of these conjectures. He was just giving it a try. However, after comparing the information that Bai Ling'er had given him, he realized that Chu Yunfan's conjectures were almost the correct answers. The reason why they were almost the correct answers was because these things were basically just guesses. He himself had not come into contact with that level of existence yet, so he could only guess. However, no matter how he looked at it, Chu Yunfan's answer seemed to be more accurate than his own. In particular, Chu Yunfan's basic formula had a few omissions. Bai Hong compared them one by one and calculated them one by one. It was very obvious that he could now calculate the parts that he originally felt could not be done. However, when it came to the most crucial part, the core part, it was not there. This was the core part that would be used to deduce the basic reaction formula, but it was just not there. He could not help but feel a little crazed. It was as if a person WH0 was about to starve to death, smelled a fragrance and followed the scent, only to discover that the delicious food was too far out of reach, but it was just a short distance away. He had been studying this basic reaction formula for a long time. From the records he had dug up over the years, he understood that there was more than one basic reaction formula, but until now, he could not even deduce one. Originally, he was not too troubled. After all, there were all sorts of records. Even in the extremely prosperous alchemy during the ancient Zenith civilization, there were very few people who could deduce the basic reaction formula. Once someone succeeded, there would be no problem for them to become the leader of alchemy, just like the current alchemy king, Du Qingtao. However, Chu Yunfan had filled in the originally empty parts, causing Bai Hong's research on this basic reaction formula to suddenly increase from 50% to 90%, leaving only 10% unfilled. It did not seem like much, but this was in fact, the most crucial part. Perhaps the first 90% would only need about 10 years of study, but the last 10% would take hundreds of years. And even then, one might not achieve any results. He was only one step away from the final step, and he could not cross it, which was why he felt so unsatisfied. At this moment, he wished he could fly directly to Calm Ocean City. Of course, he was not looking for Chu Yunfan, but for the alchemy master behind Chu Yunfan. He did not believe that Chu Yunfan could solve this reaction formula. And even if the speculations that they've made were wrong, in fact, anyone would take a long time to complete this reaction formula, even great alchemists. Bai Hong knew that Bai Ling'er had only taken second place. He was still very confident in his granddaughter. There was basically no one her age who could be compared to her and take first place in the alchemy trainee exam like taking something out of a bag. Her results were also within his expectations. The practical assessment result was 98 points, which was great. However, Chu Yunfan had gotten full marks in the practical. This was not something that could be achieved by luck. Bai Hong was now even more interested in the alchemy master behind Chu Yunfan. The degree of the other party's prowess could be seen from the way he groomed his disciples. If it was possible, he also wanted to discuss this reaction formula with the alchemy master behind Chu Yunfan. If he could research it, the entire field of alchemy would take a huge step forward, and alchemy itself was born to support martial arts. One could imagine that the overall strength of the human race would also rise by a huge margin. However, just as he was in the middle of his musing, there was a knock on the door. A middle-aged man hurriedly pushed the door open and said, "Teacher, there's a general of the Federation Army outside." "A general of the army?" Bai Hong said somewhat strangely. Suddenly, Bai Hong suddenly recalled that big plan. He immediately understood what this general was here for. "Let's go. You should also pack up your things and follow me." And while that was happening, on the other side of the world, Chu Yunfan had just returned home when he got a notification on his personal computer. He had passed the alchemy trainee exam. Now, he could finally fully display his skills. He could sell the medicinal pills he made and use them to earn money. If that was the case, with his level of ability, it would not be long before he could earn enough money to cure his sister. It was hard to say how much money an alchemist would earn in the early stages. But in the later stages, there would be alchemists whose wealth could rival that of a country. One could only imagine how much money they earned. There are still about 5 days left. Let's hurry up and see if I can break through some more. Although I've passed the examination for the focus class, there are more geniuses in the focus class. It won't be like class 11 from before where there will only be 2 or 3 of them. Chu Yunfan clenched his fists and said. Not only did he not feel relaxed after passing the examination for the focus class, he felt even more pressured. Behind him was his sister's hope to cure her illness, his parents' expectation of being attentive, and the ambition that he had been suppressing all these years. He wanted to strive for success. The final test to see if he could make the great leap, which was the college entrance exam. There was still more than half a year left. There was still quite some time left. After returning home, Chu Yunfan did not go anywhere. He just went online and bought some energy medicine. When he cultivated, he would consume large amounts of energy, which could not be replenished by just eating. Not even if he ate ginseng and Ganoderma, which were great supplements, that it was still far from enough. Since then, Chu Yunfan did not go out at all. Instead, he wholeheartedly entered seclusion. 5 days passed by quickly. In the blink of an eye, it was over. The school had finally completed the class allocation. Early one morning, Chu Yunfan opened his eyes after his meditation and let out a long breath. At this moment, he could feel that he was much stronger than he was a few days ago. What he cultivated was a supreme cultivation technique called the Mighty Etymol Emperor method. In addition, he consumed energy medicine to replenish his energy while continuously cultivating. He had finally stabilized the Qi-Si stage that he had just broken through. He did not have to worry that his Qi-Si would collapse in his sleep and that he would return to the physical stage. On the contrary, he had already stepped into the peak of the first level of the Qi-Si stage. It was only a matter of time before he reached the second level. He had gained a lot in the past 5 days. Chapter 59. A New Beginning. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 59. A New Beginning. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. As the sun rose over Calm Ocean City, the city with a population of more than 10 million came to life once again. After a few days of adjustment, the students of Calm Ocean City's number 13 high school finally returned. Many people were crowding the electronic bulletin board. They were all looking for their names, one by one. Chu Yunfan glanced at the outermost list and found his name in the focus class of the martial arts stream. Che focus class of the martial arts stream was divided into classes, Class 1 and Class 2. Chu Yunfan was in Class 2. Other than himself, Gao Hongji and Tang Siyu were also in Class 2. The other students of Class 11 who were admitted to the focus class of the martial arts stream, including Feng Dang, were in Class 1. In the list of Class 2, Chu Yunfan saw another familiar name. It was Yang, who had ranked first in Class 2. After confirming his class, Chu Yunfan immediately went to Class 2 of the martial arts stream. As soon as he stepped into the classroom, Chu Yuntan felt many gazes sweep over him. Ordinary people would feel a little uncomfortable being stared at like this. However, Chu Yunfan did not feel it at all. Instead, he was a little surprised. Although he had prepared himself, when he saw these students, he was still a little surprised. This was different from the uneven situation in Class 11 where he had come from. The students in Class 2 of the martial arts stream were all uniformly of high standards. The lowest level was the cultivation of the 9th level of the physical stage, the QJ nourishment stage. Among them, 1/3 had even stepped into the Qi C stage. These people were the elites of the entire Qi class. Of course, this was only the current situation. There was still more than half a year before the college entrance exam. Some people would be left behind and some people would even catch up and surpass them. These were all very common things. As Chu Yunfan looked around, he saw unfamiliar people. However, very quickly, he spotted two familiar figures. One was naturally his BDNVL.M best friend, Gao Hongji, and the other was Tang Siyu. The two of them were near each other. Although they were not very familiar with each other, in this unfamiliar environment, they instinctively sat closer to each other. A few boys were sitting beside Tang Siyu who were trying their best to ingratiate themselves with Tang Siyu. They did not notice the hint of impatience in Tang Siyu's expression. Chu Yunfan immediately walked to Tang Siyu's side and sat down beside her, isolating the few boys from her. The boys' faces were clearly filled with displeasure. Tang Siyu, on the other hand, let out a long sigh of relief and revealed a grateful expression toward Chu Yunfan. "What are you looking at? What are you looking at? Move aside. Can't you see that she isn't even willing to talk to you? With your sharp eyes, you still want to chase girls." At this moment, Gao Hongji walked over and chased the few boys away. Although the few boys were usually influential figures in their class, they were not ignorant. They too have heard of Gao Hongji's name. Obviously, Gao Hongji was not someone they could deal with. "Thank you." Tang Siyu bit her lower lip slightly and said to the two of them. She could see that the two of them were trying to help her out. "It's nothing. The three of us from Class 11 are in Class 2, so we have to support each other." Gao Hongji waved his hand and winked as he said with a chuckle. "Besides, I'm also afraid that you'll beat them up. Those guys probably don't know how powerful you are." Seeing Gao Hongji winking at her, Tang Siyu could not help but smile. Old Gao is right. There are only the three of us from Class 11. It's only right for us to support each other. Besides, you've helped me out before. I'm just returning the favor." Chu Yunfan grinned and said. Chu Yunfan and Gao Hongji's words were not groundless. Although these students would be in the same class in the future, the class would clearly be divided into small cliques according to the classes they had come from. Among all the people in the class, the most dazzling and eye-catching was none other than Yang. He sat alone in the center of the classroom. Although 2 or 3 classmates were sitting beside him, none of them could steal his limelight. Even if he did not say a word, he was still the center of the class, everyone's eyes were focused on him. That must be Yang. I didn't expect that we would be in the same class as him. I thought he would be in Class 1. What's so strange about that? The school has opened 2 focus classes. I'm sure they're hoping that the 2 classes will compete with each other. They don't want a one-sided situation. I heard that Yang's cultivation is at level 4 or above of the Qi C stage. No way. We haven't even stepped into the Qi C stage yet. Otherwise, why is he the most influential person in the school? It said that he had already achieved the Chi C stage last year. Dong Fanghao, the #1 high school student in Donglua, is even more powerful. He's already in the energy refinement stage and is even more powerful than many of his teachers. Chu Yunfan heard the discussions of many people and was secretly amazed. He had not expected Ouyang to be so powerful. Although his good friend Gao Hongji was also an influential person and was often called a genius, it was clear that even famous people and geniuses were divided into different levels. In this place where there were many experts and elites, Gao Hongji was still considered an elite. However, he was no longer the most outstanding one. It was just that compared to Lu Yushu, he did not know who was stronger. Chu Yunfan had never competed with Lu Yushu at her full strength, so he had no way to compare. However, even though he was surprised, he was not discouraged. Compared to the others, he had only risen to prominence recently. There was still more than half a year before the college entrance examination, and it was still unknown who would emerge victorious in the future. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps could be heard. A tall and sturdy figure walked into the classroom. Chu Yunfan looked at the figure in shock because it was none other than their martial arts coach, Qin Wu. Tang Xiu and Gao Hongji were also looking at Qin Wu in shock. As Qin Wu entered the classroom, his gaze swept across the crowd and said, "Hello, everyone. I think some of you know me while some of you don't. I shall introduce myself again. My name is Qin Wu. I used to be a martial arts coach. But now, I'm the homeroom teacher of Class 2, the most important class in the martial arts class stream." Immediately, many students stood up in uproar. Regardless of whether they knew him or not, they had not expected the homeroom teacher of Class 2 to be Qin Wu. Because even if they had not met him before, they had at least heard of Qin Wu's name. Chapter 60. The weapon I'm going to use. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 60. The weapon I'm going to use. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. There were many legends about Qin Wu among the students, especially the fact that he was a retired Special Forces instructor. The army itself was a gathering of quite a number of experts of human society, and the Special Forces were the experts among these experts. Qin Wu, who had retired from the Special Forces, naturally gave off a very mysterious aura that aroused everyone's curiosity. To know that you are all the best in your previous classes, but that was before you knew me. Now, I don't care what kind of pride you had in the past, but now you have to come down to earth and start anew. As your homeroom teacher, I only have one goal, and that is to get all of you good university placements in next year's college entrance exam. Qin Wu said frankly while standing in front of the classroom. Since my understanding of all of you is still very limited, I've decided to temporarily appoint Ouyang as the class monitor of Class 2. Any objections? After he finished speaking, he looked at Ouyang. Ouyang shook his head and said, "No problem." If it was someone else, perhaps the other students would have had some objections. However, this person was Ouyang. Everyone knew how powerful he was, so why would they have any objections? Unlike the liberal arts stream, the monitor of the martial arts classes could only be the strongest student, of course. All of you must be very happy to be admitted to the focus class. And I'll tell you that being admitted to the focus class means you'll be able to enjoy more resources than others. The school's teaching resources will be diverted toward you. Your teachers in all your subjects will be of the best. On top of that, each of you will even receive a monthly allowance of 10,000 yuan. If you perform well, you will receive more. Qin Wu said slowly. After hearing this list of benefits, even though they had already known about it, many of the students still could not conceal the look of excitement from creeping onto their faces. However, they understood the meaning behind Qin Wu's words. There was a but. Sure enough, as expected, Qin Wu continued, but you'll have to pay a price to enjoy these things. I believe all of you should have some understanding of the current situation of human society. Countless men are fighting on the front lines, beating back monsters in order to maintain the survival space of the human race. As for who will be sent to the front lines, you who have enjoyed the best resources will naturally be the ones. Therefore, your lessons from now on will be different from the ones you've had before. You'll be attending an actual combat class. This actual combat class will not have you fight each other but against the monsters that threaten our survival. I'll be frank, there's a chance that you may die in this class. Therefore, if you want to continue staying in the focus class, you'll have to sign a death contract. This will indicate that if you die during class, the school will not be held responsible. Qin Wu's words caused an immediate uproar among the students. Although they were the cream of the crop among the students in the school, putting aside the powerful monsters, they did not have much experience in fighting against humans. These monsters were not just any wild beasts. They were far more powerful than regular wild beasts. Human society was filled with experts and fierce generals. All kinds of high-tech weapons were created one after another. However, even so, they could barely maintain the balance of power against those monsters. Even Earth, the base of human society, could not wipe out the monsters completely. One could imagine how dangerous those monsters were. These students had indeed thought of fighting the monsters, but only after university. They definitely had not expected to have to embark on the road of fighting these monsters so early. Through Qin Wu's solemn attitude, they understood that people could die in actual combat. Seeing the hesitation on the faces of these students, the comers of Qin Wu's mouth curled up slightly. It was because these delicate flowers had been raised in greenhouses that there existed such a death toll. In the army, those young soldiers were only a few years older than them, but there was no such thing as a death toll. Every year, a huge number of troops would be wiped out, thus death was not a big deal. It's still not too late for you to quit. You can transfer to the normal class. No one will force you to stay, but if you choose to do so, you'll have to be prepared to die. Qin Wu said. Modern society stresses the equality of power and obligation. If you want to enjoy the treatment of being superior, you have to be prepared to pay the price of being superior. You have to bear the responsibility of being superior to ordinary folk. Chu Yunfan agreed with what Qin Wu said. It was indeed so. If everyone only wanted to enjoy special treatment and did not want to take on obligations, the entire human society would have collapsed long ago. Many students looked hesitant, but in the end, no one withdrew. They all had the desire to make a name for themselves. They had already come this far, so how could they give up so easily? Very good. None of you gave up. You can be considered decent people. Qin Wu said. As things stand as such, let's continue then. Next, because you all will have to face the consequences of using it, you will have to choose a practice weapon based on your martial skills. Although you're all cultivators, it is very difficult for a mortal body to contend with those monsters. Qin Wu continued, however, the reason why humans are humans and are not just beasts is that we know how to use tools. Although it is difficult to fight against monsters with just a mortal body, other than some talented people, we can use all kinds of weapons to make up for our lack of claws and teeth. Speaking up to this point, Qin Wu even looked at Chu Yunfan with a meaningful look in his eyes, as if he wanted to say something. This is the reason why modern human society advocates both liberal and martial arts. A boorish man who only knows how to fight and kill will never have a way out. All of you should think carefully about what weapons you should choose. Our school's arsenal has some basic weapons and martial skills that are open to you. Of course, if you want to learn better martial skills, you'll have to spend your own money to obtain them. In this modern society, basic and low-level martial skills could be learned by anyone. However, for more advanced martial skills or unique ones, you'd have to spend your own money to learn them. You could even join a sect or a force and gain the opportunity to learn them. The Federation Army had a high death toll, but it still attracted many people into joining because the army had many resources and various martial skills. The martial skills there were also very comprehensive and extensive. Yunfan, what weapon do you plan to use? I've already thought about it. Ha, I plan to use a spear. When the time comes, I'll shoot down the hearts of many girls. Gao Hongji said with a chuckle as if he was thinking of the day when he would be famous. The weapon I'm going to use.